Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to I've lost count now. It must be the fifth yours seminar of this term. I think you've all been to these events before, but if anyone is new to them, this is a series of heritage research seminars that's been underway now for 4 years, and we've reached the point now where we're managing to stage one of these every week during the term time, during the autumn and the spring terms. And we're streaming live as well, so welcome to those of you that are listening from beyond York, as it were. It's a great pleasure this evening to introduce a speaker, someone I've known on and off for quite a long time, but we've only met very occasionally, and usually in far-flung parts of the world. The last time was in Peru about 2 or 3 years ago, I think. So we haven't really had much of an opportunity to talk and to discuss some of the research interests that we share. Carsten was involved in the Faro Convention, for example, and that's something that my students will know is something that I consider to be a very important document in terms of the way we think about heritage and engage people within it. So Carsten is currently in Norway. He's Director General at the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, but he's worked in a number of other countries and situations as well, but that's his current role. Carsten is involved, or has been involved, in a number of heritage projects, but tonight he's going to talk about heritage on the edge, Armenian heritage in Eastern Anatolia, 100 years after. Carsten, great pleasure.
Thank you, John. I've been looking forward to this because it is also meant for me the necessity of trying to compile things that I've been working on for quite some time. And I just returned a few weeks ago from Eastern Anatolia from a workshop there, a second workshop. And now you forced me to sort of trying to pull these things together in one perspective. So that's what I'm trying to test out on you tonight, whether that works or not. First of all, I'll test out if oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, it worked. Okay. Right. This year is 100 years since the First World War began. And what we should be aware of is, of course, that it was not only a terrible war in Europe, in the western part of Europe. It was truly a world war because it changed a lot of things in the way the world is working. We know that the major Western European powers, France, Germany, Britain, more or less bled out on this. And Western Europe never recovered its full position as a world dominator. But also the impact on other major geopolitical actors was very severe, even more severe. I'm thinking of the Russian Empire, which was transformed into the Soviet Empire. I'm thinking of the Austro-Hungarian or Habsburgian Empire that was dissolved in a lot of different states, nation states. And I'm thinking also of the Ottoman Empire, which used to be a huge realm organizing much of Europe and much of the Near East and much of North Africa. That was dissolved. Wrong again, okay. We're used to cultural heritage as a concept that we think of as perhaps something which has to do with the nation state, with the monumentality, things that we are attaching to our nation states. But we should be aware that the way we often employ the term cultural heritage is very much a Western European or North American invention, whereas in other parts of Europe it looks different. This monument is a memorial for the fallen of the First World War. It's situated in a small Romanian village to the north to the south of Timișoara, and it lists the names of all the fallen from that village. But the trick is that when you walk around the monument, you'll see inscriptions in different languages. There's Hungarian, there's Serb, there's German, and there's Romanian, of course. And they all fought in the same war. They all fought on the same side in that war. They were all Austro-Hungarians, sort of in the Habsburgian army, but they had different languages. They lived in the same village. They joined in each other's religious ceremonies and celebrations, but they formed each different religious communities: Orthodox, Serbian, Hungarian, Reformist, German Reformist, and all. I mean, there were all sorts of varieties there. When you take a look at the map of Europe, this is, let's say, one could almost call it an arbitrary map. It is, of course, not. But it was one of those many maps that were produced for the peace conference, the peace treaty negotiations at Versailles after the First World War. This is a German map, but it doesn't really matter. The matter is that you should take a look at the overall distribution of colors, because each color depicts or symbolizes one ethnic unit. When you look at the western part of Europe, you see a very homogeneous distribution of colors. Once you enter into Central Europe, and once you go further east and south, you'll see a much more muddy and muddled distribution of colors, suggesting that people were living sort of in between one another. It used to be like that in Western Europe as well, but we did our ethnic cleansing, so to speak, back in the Renaissance, late medieval period, and so on. But in the eastern half of Europe, there was another geopolitical reality. In the western part of Europe, we have these old, fairly homogeneous nation states. They haven't been called nation states all the time, but they were fairly homogeneous since, let's say, sometime in around 1500. But going further east, we have the Holy Roman Habsburgian Empire, we have the Byzantine, later the Ottoman Empire, we have the Russian Tsarist Soviet, and today Russian again Empire. Whether you want to call it empire or not, it is actually a multi-ethnic state of empire size. And then, of course, the Persian Empire as well. And this is very much the historic explanation for the very complex mixture of identities and ethnies that you find all over the Balkans, for instance, and all over the Caucasus. And that's also the explanation why these regions find it so hard to accommodate themselves with the concept of a nation state. Because in a nation state, you're supposed to have one identity on one side of the border and another identity on the other side of the border. That was not the same way it worked in the multi-ethnic imperial states like the Ottoman Empire. And of course, you have, York has its own part in this bygone imperial order, with the Constantine being becoming the emperor of the Roman Empire here in York, and his splitting up of the Roman Empire into the East and West, which was more or less what decided the patterns of divisions between Eastern and Western, the East and Western Church, the East and Western part of Europe. And the successor to the Byzantine Empire was, of course, the Ottoman Empire. They continued with much of the same civil servants, much of the same administrative system. They changed religion, they changed language to a certain degree, but it remained very much a successor to the East Roman or Byzantine Empire. If we take a look at the Ottoman Empire at its largest extension. You see the dotted red line. That shows the maximum expansion of that empire. And you can see how much of Europe, how much of the Caucasus, how much of the Near East, how much of North Africa it has actually covered. Right. That ended, not all of it ended with the First World War, because the Ottoman Empire had been in decline for decades or centuries before that, but it finally was terminated with the First World War. The Sykes-Picot agreement, which has been sort of rediscovered now when we try to explain what's going on in the Near East these years, was a treaty between France and England, or France and the United Kingdom, to, let's say, share the Middle East between them in zones of influence and domination, to follow the rule of the Ottomans that had been defeated in World War I. The dismantling of the Ottoman Empire continued with the Treaty of Sèvres, which split up not only the Near East, but also Anatolia into different zones, of which only a minor part was left for the Turks themselves to sovereignly rule. The rest was divided into zones of different European states for their domination, and for a new Armenian state, which more or less coincided with areas of Anatolia where the Armenians had been living for thousands of years. Not necessarily forming a uniform state there earlier, but rather patches of presence in towns, villages, cities, some of them quite big, but always mixed with other people as well. So that was the Ottoman Empire, the end of the Ottoman Empire. But then came the so-called Turkish War of Independence, that's what the Turks call it, where they fought back against the Europeans and the Armenians, and defeated them, and forced them to accept what became the present-day borders of Turkey. During that war, we also saw a decrease in diversity within what used to be the territories of a multi-ethnic empire. If we take a city that was called Salonika by the Turks and Thessaloniki by the Greeks, that shifted from Turkish to Greek hands. And what you see here is on the right, top right, is a statistic showing the composition of the population, and you can see there were Greeks, Turks, Jews living there. The Jews, well, they disappeared, strangely enough, during the Second World War. One can only guess why and how. But the Turks also ceased to exist there. I want to call your attention to this image over there. Any guess who they are, these people? What sort of ethnic would they represent, do you think? Well, I wouldn't have guessed myself if I wouldn't have found out. But they are Jews, in fact, but they are wearing the fez. But they are Turkish Jews, probably of Spanish Jewish origin, the Sephardi Jews, Latino Jews, who came from after the Spaniards kicked out the Jews and the Muslims from Spain. That man in the middle is born in Thessaloniki. He is called Kemal Atatürk, and the Greeks still care for his house. Under there is the Greeks fleeing Smyrna, today's Izmir, and Yeah, that's more or less the picture you got. The end of diversity. Because the Greeks were shifted from the coast of Anatolia to present modern Greece, and the Turks were shifted from modern Greece to Anatolia. Many of the people who came, so-called Greeks who came from Anatolia, didn't speak Greek. They were Turkish-speaking Christians, so they were counted as Greeks. Whereas on the other hand, there were Greek-speaking Muslims, they were counted as Turks. Right. Some years before, 1915, during the war, we had what the Armenians insist on calling the Armenian genocide, and the Turks refused to recognize it as a genocide. But what we could say is, at least it was an ethnic cleansing that took part in Anatolia in particular, where the Armenian citizens of the Ottoman Empire were forced out of the houses, out of the cities, out of the villages, and marched down to the deserts to the south, where many of them died on the way from hunger, from attacks, from all sorts of disasters. The Armenians count 1.5 million died. The Turks say it's less. Anyway, the effect was that what used to be a rich culture of Armenian presence for thousands of years in Anatolia was terminated brutally. I'm not going to go into the genocide discussion because that's not what I'm here to talk about. But I can just say that it's very complicated, it's very difficult, and it's very sore. And if you want to do something, working with Armenian heritage, working together with Turks, trying to bridge the gap between Turks and Armenians, you should avoid that discussion. You should focus on other things. And that's what we've been trying to do. Just a small abstract reflection about what we do with cultural heritage. We edit it. We produce difference. This abstract patterns of triangles and circles can be edited. If you draw a border between the two, you can start to edit to make sure that you produce a difference. You can take out certain figures from each side, and you will end up with a homogeneous distribution on each side, where you have the triangles living on one side of the border and the circles living on the other side. And that's very much what's happening during wartime. This is an example which has nothing to do with the subject I'm otherwise talking about. It's the so-called Pabst plan for a Germanic Warsaw that was made at the beginning of the Second World War, and the plan was to eradicate all Polish-looking buildings and monuments. They should go away, and Warsaw should be transformed into something which could pass as a normal Germanic regional urban center. They used that plan when they decided to destroy Warsaw, when they had to retire in front of the Red Army. Culture and heritage in areas of conflict is part of the conflict theme, and targeted destruction of culture and heritage, or cultural cleansing or culticide, is an important feature of warfare. We saw it in Bosnia, the Mostar Bridge. The photo shows the moment when it was hit by an artillery round. And the intention of destroying cultural heritage is to rewrite history by eradicating part of the script of the landscape, so that you take out what used to belong to the ethnic identity. You don't want to be there anymore. And that's more or less how it works. So first cultural destruction, and then afterwards ethnic cleansing. Sometimes they come in reverse orders. So this is sort of the understanding, or the line of thought which lays at the foundation of a desire to start to work with Armenian heritage which is abundantly present in the Eastern Anatolia, where Armenians used to live. For the Armenians on the other side of the border, here's Armenia, it's a very sore thing. They are grieving their what they consider their lost lands, West Armenia as they call it. And for the Turks it's very difficult, because the Turks still have the memories of what happened during the First World War, when Turkey was more or less, or the Anatolia was more or less split up between different major powers. The Turks say, our big question is, are we marble block, solid block of marble, or are we a mosaic that can be split with a sledgehammer? And for them, that's the question. And I mean, you can see right now how sore they are about the Kurdish question. So we had two field workshops, one in 2013, just at the Armenian border here in Kars region, and a second one last month in the Mush region further south, 150 kilometers from the Syrian border. Just saying that because we could feel the impact of the war. These are the locations we visited during the field workshops. And some years before that, I've been a couple of times to Armenia, and one of the times I was allowed special permission to go into the military zone, which is adjacent to the Turkish border. The border is closed. You cannot cross the border. And from the Armenian side, you can look over into a city called Ani, a medieval city set to be sort of a hub on the so-called Silk Road. I'm not going to discuss that concept, it will lead us far astray. But an important trade city, walled city, very impressive. And the Armenians consider that part of their national heritage, but it is in Turkey, just as they consider the Ararat mountain, which is also on the Turkish side of the border, their holy national mountain. When you come to Armenia and go to Yerevan, everything is called Ani there, because it's so important to them. I stayed at the Ani Plaza Hotel in Yerevan. If I smoked, I would probably have smoked Ani cigarettes, and the brandy is Ani Ararat brandy, very good. It all reminds them of the lost golden age, when Armenia and Armenian culture flourished. So we decided to go together, supported by the Norwegian government, with Armenians from Armenia, with Armenians from the United States, also with, if one can say, ordinary Americans from the United States, and with French, and one Macedonian, and a couple of Norwegians. We organized a field workshop, to revisit some of these sites around Ani. We wanted to see how they were and try to see which one of them could be salvaged, and if we could develop some projects and some suggestions for the Turkish government to work with it. This is the walls of the city of Ani. This is the situation of Ani. At the border here is the border river. This is Armenia, this is Turkey, and this is Ani. It's a huge, huge tract of land. It's been a fantastic big city. And you just see the churches and the mosques and remains of the major the major building left. If you zoom in on the Google Maps, the photo has been taken on a day where there was snow cover, and there you see the density of structures. This is the Cathedral of Ani. This is another church. Ani Cathedral shouldn't be there. It's wrong. But you can see the big structures. But you also see the snow-covered, more sort of ephemeral structures. They are sort of ordinary houses, so to speak. Look how dense it is. But this is what it looks like today. This is a cathedral of Ani, 10th century. This is a church which is now being restored by the World Monuments Fund. It's called Surp Sargis, the Holy Saviour's Church. Surp means saint. And this is the bridge that used to connect the Armenian side with the Turkish side. The bridge is a medieval bridge, and it's collapsed. Of course, in a place like that, there are many different stories about the monument you see. And for instance, this one is said to be the earliest mosque of Anatolia. But the Armenians would say, no, it's not a mosque, it used to be a bishop's palace. And maybe it was both. It's still being discussed. And I've asked several experts on this, and all of them have different answers. But of course, it's very sort of ideological also, because if you say it's the earliest mosque, it's important for the Turks. If you say it's in the Armenian bishop's palace, it's more important for the Armenians. The same here with the Church of the Holy Apostles, Surp Sargis, where you see a church, but with a lot of influence from Seljuk and Iranian style, which has made confusion and made the Turks say, well, this was a caravanserai. But in fact, it is an Armenian church, but it was heavily influenced by the other cultures and impacts from them that were here. So Muslim and Christian cultures are blending in together here. And as you see, the local people come and visit Ani and make photos of the Christian wall paintings. Yeah, they're fabulous. This is St. Gregory's Church from 1215. Outside of Ani, you find sites like this. Fantastic monastic site with one upper monastery and two monastic churches down here. This is border river Armenia in here. But you also see the state these buildings are in. There's some fantastic stone carving works here and here. And it's all falling apart. So something needs to be done. But luckily, the Turks are interested in this. They want to take care of this heritage. I went to a meeting with the Deputy Minister of Culture and Heritage in Turkey, of Culture, and he said, we want to take care of this, and we would accept help from outside to advise us also. Many of the Armenian buildings are disintegrated, and stones are reused like this, which is spolia, we would call it, if it was in Italy, and a stone with an inscription integrated into a Turkish village house. Here you see one of the most fantastic cathedrals from the 7th century, a period where the whole Byzantine Empire and the Near East was completely revolutionized by the expansion of the Muslims. It was a major geopolitical change that came about there, and this church was built at that moment. The Cathedral of Mren, and you see the size of it. Look at this person down there. She's an expert on Armenian inscriptions and running around to find as much as you can while the daylight is still there. This is probably one of the only depictions of the Emperor Heraclius, who ruled in these very, very difficult times of the Byzantine Empire. Now we go on to a small town called Digor. Digor is a very small town, or big village, you would say, and we discovered that they have cultural ambitions. They have developed something called Digor Kulturplattformu, Digor's cultural platform, and as simple for that if you see on this green scarf or band or whatever it is, you can see lying down a church, a silhouette of an Armenian church. And here we are, the people from the field workshop, walking out through a beautiful green valley on a wonderful hike, and then climbing up the hillsides later on. It's about an hour's walk if you're not sort of if you're fit for walking. It's about an hour's walk, and then you end up here. There's a church of Saint Sargis, Surp Sargis, and the monastery is called Khtzkonk Monastery. It's not easy to pronounce, but just exercise and you'll manage. The thing is that this is the only remaining church of 5. You can't see them all 5 here, but there used to be 5 until some time in the early 19th century, early 20th century, when they were destroyed, at the same time as the Armenians were evicted from those lands. And as you see here, the only remaining church, Surp Sargis, is heavily damaged. It has taken at least 1 artillery round from Turkish artillery. The Turkish military used to target these Armenian monuments until the 60s. Then they sort of lost interest in that or stopped it. And today, there's no attempt of getting rid of Armenian heritage. But if this is the view down the valley from the church, where you can see the herdsmen bringing down their sheep from the summer pastures. It's a fantastic landscape. It's a fantastic potential. And what we're trying to do now is to develop a project where we put money into the local community to make them stewards of that church, so that we stop it from further falling apart, further harassment or molesting or tagging or whatever happens. We want simply to develop the local community into stakeholders by helping small-scale tourism develop there. That's the idea, and then put some money into restoration of the church as well. That was last year's field workshop, and this September we published a report with recommendations on what to do with these different monuments. And there are a few copies over here, 3 copies, but you can download also from World Monuments Fund organization or from my institute's site, nico.no, and there you'll get it. And we have recommendations there for the Turkish authorities. We've been very careful to avoid any sort of ideological discussions about whether this is Turkish or Armenian, how Christian it is, and recommendations about reinstallation of crosses or any Christian symbols. We want to avoid all that. We want to be not ideological. We want to be denationalized and only focus on how can you manage this heritage technically, because that's where the Armenians and the Turks can actually work together without having arguments about the significance, the meaning of this and that. Okay, this October we had a second workshop where we were going to the Mush region further south in Eastern Anatolia to try to see what was left there. What would we find? We found much less. But the interesting thing was that we found Armenians there, which we didn't find on the first workshop. This is from the city of Mush, small town nobody heard about until recently. I didn't hear about it. This is actually an Armenian association. Mush Armenia means Mus, Armenian community, social and tourism organization. That's extraordinary. In those parts of Anatolia, it's very conservative, but now they're having an Armenian community. These 3 gentlemen are Armenians. Here's the local. This one is elected as president of West Armenia, which of course does not exist, but is more or less an exile organization. This gentleman is a parliament member of the Baghdad parliament, is Armenian, from the Armenian minority in Iraq. He came there by accident at the same time as us, and we went to say hello to these people. Then we went out to look for the sites where we knew there used to be Armenian monasteries, churches, and other stuff. This is a village belonging to the Zaza minority, whom many say are Kurds, but the Zaza says, no, we're not Kurds, we are something else. We speak a different language, and they probably do. They are more Iranian, they think. But that can be discussed for a long time. What you discover when you go into these lands is the diversity of identities. And I mean, people don't even agree about their own identities and the neighbors' identities. So it's completely different. I mean, you had a discussion lately with the Scots about whether they were how much Scots and how much Brits they were. But anyway, you sorted that out. But try to go to Anatolia, then you really find out how complex things can be. In this Sasa village, there used to be an Armenian monastery. And you see some of the brickwork here, a beautifully cut Armenian stonework. But it's been reused and reinserted into village houses. This is part of the church. And you see it's only the upper part. There's a lower part down underground, which is now covered in a pile up of deposits. When you go inside some of their buildings, you'll see that they have a different history. With, for instance, this column, which truly is very Armenian. And in there they are also having their ovens and other functions. So they're reusing the structures and the building materials. It's a metabolism, very impressive in a way. You cannot sort of recover this as a monastery, but you can actually go there and reflect upon the transformation of materiality, which is something which has always been going on. Some places you find well-preserved structures like this reused monastic storage vault. But when you walk out in these Kurdish villages, you will meet people who are interested in talking to you and showing you the remains of the Armenian presence. These are stones which the villagers have painted white with chalk in order to illustrate that these are carved stones with inscriptions or decorations made by the Armenians. And they're telling you the story about that. Or they point to the little crosses here, which are here we go. The crosses here are what remains of the apside of an Armenian church, which was half carved into the mountain wall, and the crosses are being painted up by the Kurdish villagers to show what used to be here. So you find people here who are sort of very, very sort of open and really wanting to talk to you. But you also find in these villages, oh sorry, I'll come back to that. This is the president of West Armenia walking his way over a barren field to climb that mountain where there used to be an Armenian fortress. There was only a few stones left of it. This man had grandparents who were Armenians. They saved their lives in 1915 by assuming a Turkish identity and converting into Islam. And he showed us around and showed us places where there used to be churches and things like that. This gentleman here with the white hat, he was the owner of a water mill that didn't have any water anymore. That watermill used to be owned by his grandfather and an Armenian man together. The watermill was probably Armenian originally, but they had it together, and until 1915, when the Armenians were driven out. But they were talking about this, and that was different from what we met the year before when we were closer to the Armenian border. There, nobody talked about the Armenians. This man, that's in a city called Malazgirt, or Melazkert in Armenian. You might think it's an awful painting, and it probably is, but it's also a painting that depicts how the city used to look, at least in the way they talk about it, when it was Armenian. And this man is the owner of the restaurant we went to, and his brother painted this. And their grandparents were Armenian survivors from 1915, who also survived by assuming a Turkish identity and converting to Islam. But they're talking now, they're speaking up now and saying, well, we are Armenians. In the foreground of the picture, there's a burial ground with mixed Muslim and Christian Armenian burials. What you find is that the local people, Turks or Kurds or whatever, young people have the idea that they can find Armenian gold down the graves and in the churches, so they excavate them in a pretty harsh way. And they never find any gold. Now they developed the idea that the Armenians were so sly that they buried their gold in Muslim graves. And now they start to exhume the Muslims as well from the graves. It's awful. And we're trying to convince them whenever we talk to them, the real gold is in fact the buildings themselves. You should keep them. And the graves themselves, you shouldn't destroy them, whether they are Muslim or Christian. You should let them be there. There's no gold, but they are dead ancestors. There's a citadel in that city, and that's been heavily reconstructed now. It's not, I mean, it's not made in any way to make things look different from what they were. It's just lack of talent. It's simply a misguided restoration, which is happening here. It's built sort of, you could say, new and better heritage. That's probably the principle guiding it. In another village, or in a village we went to, we came to this church, which is a very simple structure, and therefore, I mean, it didn't have any towers or any sort of belfries or anything complicated. So for that reason, the walls have managed to sustain themselves. But of course, it doesn't look any good from outside. And it had been locked and blocked with these light concrete blocks and the door and the padlock on it here. And we asked, why is it locked? And we got various explanations. One was that some people did not want other people to come in and see that there was a church here. Others told us, no, it's to protect it from looters and grave robbers. We never found sort of one explanation of that. We have given up on it. Anyway, when we finally came inside, we start to look around, and this gentleman here has been mayor of the city for 25 years. That's a lot. And when we arrived, he was still working in the field, and he rushed back, washed, shaved, and dressed in his best suit, nice white cap, and his best cigarettes, and came to see us. These three guys thought, well, these strangers must know where the gold is. So they came in and looked wherever we were going, followed us closely. And then finally, one of our Turkish colleagues told them off and said, look, you guys, don't you dare to try to destroy more of the church. There's no gold in here, but you might make a business out of it if you actually care for it. And you could attract some people who want to come and see it and sell them some tea and some food. In Eastern Anatolia, the war is not far away, 150 kilometers. And as you all know, the Turks, the Kurds are terribly upset about the situation in Kobane, where ISIS is strangling that Kobane city and many other places. And the Turkish government does not allow the PKK to ship reinforcements across the border to take on the ISIS people. So there are huge demonstrations, and you see heavy military and paramilitary presence everywhere, like these armored vehicles with machine guns and soldiers. And one place where we stopped, I was contacted by some local people. Was in a village where they've been many of them have been working abroad, so some of them came in and we could communicate in German, and they said, look, these guys, they killed one of our friends just 1 week ago. We had a demonstration, and one of their thugs that they protect killed him with a knife and an axe. And they are very, very embedded, and asked me to take pictures of the police and tell the story about it, which I'm doing now. But for the Turks, of course, it's complicated because they have the situation with the PKK, and they are afraid of the PKK breaking away, wanting to take territory away from the Turkish Republic. And if there's a united Kurdistan in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, well, that's very serious. But everywhere you go to these villages, you see people doing this sign. It's not referring to Winston Churchill, but it means free Kurdistan. You see that everywhere. A family here. You see the boy here, father, and a bit more careful daughter, doing like that, not like that, but still she's doing it. And you saw that everywhere. So people here are very important, and people are talking about the Armenian and the Armenian history and showing what remains, even though it's much less than the first place we were last year. And there's some wonderful people there. This village is a village where the girls actually go to school. In another village we went to, the girls were taken out when they were only when they had 4 years in school. They were taken out. The Turkish government has made a new law where you have no longer 5 years of obligatory school, you have only 4 years. And then when you have finished that, you can have another 4 and yet another 4. But typically in that particular village, they were taking out the girls when they were 4, whereas the boys were allowed to continue. The girls were wanted home to take part in the household production. Whereas in this Kurdish PKK village, I think it was, the girls were in school and were not married until 18. And what you see with many of the PKK areas is that the women have quite a high position there. They're quite important. They can be commanders even in the field. In the fighting units. So it's a different picture, and very encouraging. And these two sisters were not at all afraid of the photographers. And yeah, she's 12, and the little sister's half a year with all that hair. Okay, I just want to end this with a couple of pictures which do not relate directly to the workshop we've been at, but refer to hybridity. The first is the gentleman here is an Aramaic from the Aramaic community in Cyprus. The Aramaic are Christians, but they are speaking Aramaic, which is a Semitic language closely related to other communities in Lebanon. And they were when they were in Cyprus, the Greeks said, well, they speak some sort of weird language, but since they're Christians, they must be Greeks. So Aramaic language was not recognized as a minority language. They were not recognized as a minority. They were Greeks with some sort of flaws in the language. And they've been fighting to be recognized as a minority. The Turks have been recognizing them. But these people actually come from the northern part of Cyprus, which is occupied by Turkey, and there's no way of living there. I mean, you can't have any economy there. So they have moved to Nicosia, but the Greeks do not want to recognize them. What you see there on the right-hand side, what does that look like? Do you think? Any ideas? It's a mosque here. It used to be a Gothic cathedral, and it still looks very Gothic. And I've tried to test this on some people, and when they see these, they say, "Oh yes, it's a cathedral." And then I say, "Look at the carpet," and then they start to realize that okay, why did they put it like that? And then they start to understand what it is about. But it just shows that things are shifting and things are assuming different identities and functions through time, but they can still retain traces of many different histories. And then I want to show you this one, which is intangible heritage working to preserve tangible heritage. This is a Gezi Park in Istanbul. You probably all heard about the Gezi Park. Near Taksim Square in Istanbul, the big central place where everything is going on. And Mr. Erdogan wanted to demolish the park, which is a very popular place for people to come, one of the few green spots in central Istanbul. And there was huge demonstrations there. And this man is demonstrating by dancing the traditional dervish Sufi dance, and at the same time wearing a gas mask to symbolize how the demonstrators were met with tear gas and batons and rubber bullets. Right. So what we have been trying to do with our project, and what we are trying to do now, is to actually defuse Armenian heritage as something complicated, as something loaded. And we have successfully obtained the acceptance of the Turkish government and authorities that we can work with Armenian heritage. And then even after our first workshop, the Turkish government wrote a letter to the Armenian government asking the Armenian government to point out a number of Armenian experts that could participate in the advice of the Turkish heritage authorities on how to go about the restoration of Armenian heritage. That was a huge leap forward. But we did that by focusing on the technical issues, by not discussing whether there should be a cross on top of the restored churches or not, by avoiding all those sorts of ideological things, focusing on the purely technical preservation of things. Not because the rest does not interest us, but we think that this is an example where you can actually use cultural heritage as a platform for developing a dialogue between people on opposing sides of a frozen conflict, the Turks and the Armenians. 1915, next year is 100 years ago. And there might be a lot of things going on there to mark the anniversary. And it might be very complicated for our project to survive that, but we're trying it still. The Norwegian government is supporting, and not because they are particularly interested in Armenian cultural heritage, but because they see that in this way, we can actually use cultural heritage as an asset for promoting a dialogue between people who are not otherwise talking together. So that's, instead of using cultural heritage to mark difference, we can use it to bring people together. And I think that's really great. I'm very pleased with that, and I'm very pleased with the Norwegian Foreign Minister that has been willing to support this. Right. Okay. That's all. Thank you very much.
Carsten, that's fascinating. A really nice example of various ways in which heritage can really make a difference. Wonderful stuff. And one of the reasons that we try to arrange the program of your seminars and the way that we do is to tie in to some of the themes that we cover in the master's program here as well. And I think there were some really nice connections there between some of the stuff that we cover here. Thank you. Okay. So I'll open it up for questions and discussion. Peter.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. Can I ask whether there's any scope for a mapping survey of heritage risk with regard to that cultural heritage over such a huge region, obviously? And it sounds like you've started to do that, but are there possibilities of doing that on a bigger scale? Yeah,
I think there is, but I think, I mean, the Turkish authorities seem to be interested in that, and I think much of it will be driven by them. They have a sort of a policy statement saying that Turkey is located in an area where many different cultures have been through time, and we are the stewards of this, and we have to assume responsibility for as much as we can here. And they are definitely doing that with the Armenian heritage now also. But of course, it's also a question of funding. I mean, it's like Italy, you know. Turkey is so rich on cultural heritage that they can't care for it all, and they cannot do it without support from outside, even though they are putting a lot of funds in it themselves. I think they want to do a complete inventory, or at least to cover the most important areas. The problem is that many of these sites that we visited last year and also this autumn have not been visited by any sort of professionals for the last 50, 60, 100 years maybe. So there's very little knowledge about how the state is, how their state is. So it's an enormous task to go into this, and even to find the places. We went round on a mountainside to find a monastery, and we were walking for hours and hours and hours, and in the end I had to abandon the rest of the group because I had to return with a flight to Istanbul, but the rest of the people managed to find it finally. I heard from them, but there's so much knowledge that we don't have about simple things of where are they? Where are these structures? That's the first thing, and so it takes a lot of time and a lot of interviews with local people, and yeah. But I think it is going to happen, but it will be sort of bit by bit, and what we're doing is probably only part of it, of what has to be done. We had a presentation of the report, this one. I was happy enough to bump into the Turkish Minister of Culture at a conference in Istanbul recently, and I had to hand out the European Heritage Prize together with him. So I took the opportunity and gave it to him, and afterwards I had a meeting with his deputy minister in Ankara, and he said they would definitely commit to do these surveys, but it will take time. I'm sure it will take time, and there might be setbacks. For instance, if next year there's a major political initiative to have various parliaments make resolutions about the Armenian genocide, that might upset the Turks in such a way that they want to sort of lay low and not continue this. So it's very sore. politically very sensitive. The Armenians have to be sort of, they have to accept also that this is a once in a lifetime chance to do something for Armenian heritage in Turkey. And the Turks want to do this because they also want to sort of, well, they want to make up for part of the history without really wanting to discuss the big question.
Sam, and then
Well, if you slightly monopolise you in more than one question. First, picking up on last week you said about what the Turkish motivations behind it. How much, or to what extent do you think it might be they realise they have a heritage storage asset on their eastern border?
Oh, they do. A heritage tourism asset, that what you say?
Which is sort of,
Yeah.
the Turks just realise that, there's a realisation in the corridors of power, so to speak, that they have this potential asset they could develop and use and generate money from.
Absolutely.
Is that where, or to what extent do you think the support you're potentially getting is coming from?
I think that's very true. I mean, they do realize that, and we talk openly with them about that, because the whole idea is that the only way that you can actually save these buildings is by developing some sort of stewardship or stakeholdership or whatever you want to call it among the locals. So you have to develop a mechanism for generating local income and local value from this, and in that way you can turn the local people into custodians. So that's what we want to do. And also, one must realize that part of the instability of the eastern part of Turkey is also due to the poverty of the region. I mean, it's a vicious circle. Instability generates lack of economic development, lack of investment, and so on and so forth. Tourists do not want to come to the Mush region. We were told that it might be risky to go there. Well, nothing happened to us, but I mean, that was the reaction. And so, I mean, but obviously the Turkish authorities want to develop tourism in the eastern part of Anatolia. And from the Norwegian point of view, that's also part of the idea, because the Norwegian part also see this as a way of helping development, economic and development, which can also further social stability and political stability in those parts of Turkey. We should bear in mind that in a wider setting, geopolitically, if we look at the entire region, there are not that many stable states in the area. There's Turkey, there's Iran, and maybe Israel, maybe not. And Egypt, well, we don't know. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq and Syria, well, you've seen that. So, I mean, from a sort of a point of view of taking care of international order and stabilizing factors, Turkey is very important in the region. And for that reason, there's every reason to want Turkey to continue to exist as a state. My idea, I mean, I've only sort of been just very briefly in the region. I don't know it very well, but my impression is that if you imagined that you said, okay, now it's free Kurdistan, then you would get a lot of infights, because, I mean, what about the Azars from the village who say they are not Kurds? How would they react? There are other villages where there are Kurds who do not like PKK, but who subscribe to the Mr. Erdogan's party. So, I mean, it's not a question of Kurds on one side and Turks on the other side. It's not that simple. And you might open a can of worms once you weaken Turkey, even if we don't like the democratic deficit there. It is, what I want to say is that there are many outside powers who are quite interested in seeing Turkey not into too great troubles. Okay, sorry, it took a long. That's a long answer to a short question.
I need another one, but we'll come back to you. Rob.
Well, I actually had a different question, but now I want to tack on to the end of a similar idea, which is if you're talking about developing this as a tourist asset, and Turkey obviously has a fantastic World Heritage Trail which attracts international tourism. Is there not, in response to the gentleman who asked the question, an element of developing this tourist industry and there being a natural ameliorative effect because of that, so that the people in the area who aren't necessarily ethnic Armenians will automatically confront that difficult past, and it will become something that can be better understood because there is that tourist industry anchoring that identity and the difference.
Yeah.
So from that respect, treating it as something to exploit economically isn't necessarily bad culturally.
No.
I
I absolutely agree. I think that would be very useful. The tourism is very useful because, I mean, people will come there and ask, well, where did the Armenians go? And that's a fairly obvious question. And so the story will be told, the history will be discussed. And I think that's an exposure which will be useful. And there are a lot of Armenians coming there from the diaspora. They're coming to visit these places. I think it would also be healthy for the Armenians in Armenia, in the Armenian Republic, because sometimes you feel that their identity is the identity of victims. Victimhood has become part of the national identity. And somehow they need to move beyond that, not to deny what happened. They don't have to do that, but they have to sort of take charge and be present in the old lands again, I believe. That might be a way forward.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. Thank you very much. There are so many points and interesting themes coming out of this, but I was just wondering about the conservation aspect of things. I was very interested in your approach to the technical aspects of conservation. And it's just very hard for me to imagine conservation detached from value assessment. Meaning. So could you perhaps tell us if there are any guidelines or what the technical conservation can involve in this case studies?
I can do that.
Really difficult.
We have what you will see if you download the report or look in one of the 3 copies I've left here, is that we have made a risk assessment matrix, which contains both a rating of the significance of the different monuments, where we are looking into both the heritage significance that might also include for instance, the inscriptions, the murals, also the intactness of the building, and whatever goes into sort of what you would usually say is you use to rate a monument as significant. And then we go into vulnerability assessment as well, with structure and stability. Is it exposed to flooding, soil instability, whatever? And this matrix is being used to rank the buildings. So that, I mean, you might have buildings that used to be, or who are significant, but are damaged beyond repair. And then you balance these things, and then in that way you reach a priority. And we reach a priority of 10 sites in the first workshop that we want to do something with, because you can do something with them, and some of them are very, very significant. And so that's how we go about it. And in that we also include, in our assessment and decisions, we also include the tourism development potential. So, I mean, that's it works well. I think we're using a standard developed by ICRAM, and that's so that's an international sort of general acknowledged standard we use here. And then we hope to be able to fund these different buildings. We had a presentation at the Norwegian Embassy of this report in Ankara in September, and had invited representatives from a lot of other embassies. And there was a huge interest in that. And I think that we can come up with a program and suggestions for projects that can be sort of adopted by different sponsors in cooperation with the Turkish authorities.
But sorry if I interrupt you, but isn't that a little bit like postponing the problem for when the conservation will actually take place? I mean, which features in these difficult buildings will be given priority to? Some of your examples were complicated. It was not clear whether the building was a church or a mosque.
Oh yeah.
It was used. So
right. Okay. So you mean which features will be exposed? I think the first priority is stabilization of the structures, because it's a very seismic active area we are in. So alone that will be important to start with that. And before we at all start about restoration, where you make choices about what sort of story do you want to tell, I mean, that's far out in the future. So first thing is to stabilize. And then afterwards, one can begin to discuss the other issues, which are sort of more interpretative. So we are far beyond, that is far beyond the present questions we have to address. So many buildings are threatened by imminent destruction, and that's what we have to look into first.
Yes.
I'm really interested in kind of the idea of live or controversial heritage, and how you can use museums and heritage as a way of kind of almost trying to heal communities and starting a discourse, a dialogue. I was wondering, what you're saying is that in terms of being a slow process, is your priority now to stabilise what's there and what might provide a foundation for growth later, and then acknowledge that it's a slow process and trying to preserve something that's so that at some point there can be discussion. So there's a priority to stabilise without necessarily needing interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
Painful, so that's probably the best way to deal with this kind of controversial thing.
I think so, yes, and that's why we also chosen to focus on the technical issues from the very beginning. But of course, we are discussing significance. For instance, when we are looking at the Cathedral of Mren, that's huge structure, which was at a military zone in the Armenian border. It's hugely significant as part of Christian architecture, because that cathedral has been seminal and inspiring a lot of other architecture in the Byzantine Empire, and also the later cathedral at Ani. So, I mean, it's not difficult to discuss that sort of significance, but it's more when you start to discuss a building which has been interpreted as the first mosque of Anatolia or a bishop's palace, then, I mean, then you have problems. But that's stabilized, so we don't have to deal with that urgently. That's being taken care of.
Well,
I was interested to read before I came into the room that you've been involved with Pharaoh Convention and the Council of Europe. And when I read your title, I think even before it, I read it as Heritage at the Edge of Europe, and wondered about the European project and the ideas of unity and diversity that are so important to the Pharaoh Convention. And I wondered how you saw the different challenges between how that is important in Western Europe and Northern Europe, European Union countries, and then how different is that challenge when you get to somewhere like Eastern Anatolia? And where perhaps is that division strongest? Is it strongest where you have a single identity that's national and that you can look outwards to your neighbours, or is it strongest where you have that inherent diversity in the population? in village to village and person to person? How do you see that?
I think it depends very much on how you define your state. If you define the state as a monolithic cultural unit, then the Pharaoh Convention becomes very difficult. If you define it as a diverse structure of many different intersecting identities that also cross borders, well, then it's fairly easy. And I mean, it has been done successfully in Western Europe across the Franco-German border, for instance. It's a classical example, or across the Danish-German border also. But of course, it's more difficult in parts of the world where the borders are recent, much more recent, like the Turkish border with, well, all the neighboring countries, more or less. It's a recent border. It's less than 100 years old, and it's been very disputed. So for the Turks accepting minorities, that implies that that the border splits people who belong to the same identity. That's complicated. It's much more complicated than it is for the French and the Germans, because they agree that, okay, there are French and German elements on both sides of the border, perhaps more German elements on the French side than the German side. But anyway, it's accepted. And likewise, the German-Danish border is the same, because it doesn't have any implications. The border is stable. The Turks do not feel that their border with Syria, Iraq, and Iran or Armenia is very stable. And for that reason, recognizing minorities is a different, an entirely different story. But on the other hand, they do see that they have to do it, and they are trying to do it. I don't think they've ratified the Pharaoh Convention, and I doubt they will do it. Even the Spanish haven't done it, as you might be able to imagine. I don't know if the UK government has done it. I don't think they have, no, because I mean, yeah, you have all these problems. Yeah. So I mean, it's typical. It's small states like my native Denmark or my present homeland of Norway. I mean, there are no issues there. It's not difficult, so one can do it without risk, and then say, okay, we're already doing it. But it's much more difficult for big states and big states with borders who they don't feel are secure. That's very difficult.
Okay, we should probably draw this to a close, just given the time. But does anyone got any burning, quick final questions they want to ask? Okay. Well, Carsten, thank you so much. It's given us plenty to think about and mull over and chew over. Talking of which. Carsten and Rob and I are going to the Lamb and Lion for a drink and for some supper. And there is a space at the table, if anyone, it's probably several actually, I don't know how small our table is going to be, but if anyone would like to join us for something to eat or a drink afterwards, then please do. It's going to be over the road here. And we have a few minutes just to have a glass of wine and maybe have a bit of a chat while I clear up the room and get to do the dishes out. So do the dishes, exactly. So we've probably got about 10 minutes before we need to head over the road. Just, but thank you, Carsten. Thank you very much. Fabulous presentation. And just finally, we've got another presentation next week in this series, and next week we've got Leo Schmidt from the Brandenburg Technical University of Cottbus and Polly Feversham. And they, in 1999, published a book called The Berlin Wall Today. So next week we're marking 2 anniversaries in one. We've got the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we've got the 15th anniversary of the publication of that book, which Leo and Polly wrote together. So it should be an interesting occasion. We'll try and get some appropriate refreshments for that. Okay, thank you all very much.